there's something on your chin. I do know what it is, but I'll leave it to you to explain. Stephen's going to talk to us about the releases, Exo releases, and some industry information in the wider business community that's going on. So over to you, Steve.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Grant. Yes, please excuse the rather large bandage on my chin. I did manage to have a very small altercation with a very large rock on the weekend, doing some mountain biking, and I'm feeling a little worse for wear, but the show must go on, as they say. And I keep on reminding my wife that there's nothing like a good scar to build some character in one's face, although I'm not sure that she's convinced at this point. So Exo releases and industry updates. In this session, we really like to talk to, firstly, some of the industry changes that are going on that impact our organisations, and also where we're at in terms of the Exo release cycle. It's great to come at the back end of James's session where he talked about the larger picture in terms of where we're at in terms of Exo development, but we'll get into a little bit more of that detail as well within this session. For those of you that have attended our previous user groups, you might have heard of the e-invoicing initiatives that we've recently highlighted. Both the Australian and New Zealand governments have announced a joint initiative to basically back e-invoicing as a digital initiative to bring significant savings across both government and business, which they're estimating at approximately a $30 billion saving across 10 years. And as you can imagine, for every AP transaction, there's somebody doing an AR transaction on the other side. We've got lots of manual processes that are going on within our businesses. And so the concept is, if we can automate the flow of some of these transactions, there's a significant saving in terms of that manual human cost that we see. And of course, the accuracy that comes with that as well. Australia and New Zealand are adopting the Pan-European Public Procurement Online Interoperability Framework, which is a little bit of a mouthful. It's a standard that's been adopted across about 32 countries, so broadly adopted, and what we expect is once it's reached adoption within Australia and New Zealand, that there's certainly an opportunity for that to be expanded, potentially for the global transactions that we do as well. So we expect to see this as the first step, I suppose, in that broader initiative of how we bring this global community closer together and get real efficiencies across our supply chain administrative processes. In November, the Australian government did release a little bit of an update around this with their new digital business plan initiatives. The key point there being that the government will mandate e-invoicing for all government agencies by 1st of July 2022, with an expectation that over 80% will be received electronically within about 3 months' time. That second point is also quite key to note, in that they're going to be consulting on options for mandatory adoption of e-invoicing across all levels of government, but also by business. So there's a significant budgetary element that's been allowed for that consultation process within the digital business plan budget rollout. But it certainly sounds as if there's a plan to push for mandatory adoption across all organisations, I suppose in a similar way to what we saw with single touch payroll and the payroll initiatives in New Zealand as well. So it will be interesting to see how that develops. In terms of New Zealand, the most recent sort of news announcement around that was the first transactions flowing effective December 2019 by a business in Wellington. In terms of next steps, both the Australian and New Zealand governments have announced several accredited service providers that are ready today to support your e-invoicing requirements. These service providers basically make it possible to connect to the PPOL, what's called e-delivery network. We've actually seen a number of EDI providers take a front foot, providing early access to that gateway. The benefit that provides is if you already have an EDI van that you work with, an EDI value-added network, and you're already communicating them within an EDI format, essentially those EDI providers will act as a translator between those EDI formats you potentially use today and the PPOL formats that are required to support e-invoicing. So if you're currently using an EDI van either for client-facing or supplier-facing EDI transactions, there's a real opportunity to get a bit of an early lead on this. If you currently work with government, this is probably something that you'll be quite aware of, the need to start to make some inroads on your e-invoicing initiatives. And certainly we'd suggest you consider an EDI van as one of your first points of call. Alternatively, if you purely need to do supplier side e-invoicing, Expense Manager have also released support for e-invoicing transactions, and Sharon New will talk to that within her session as well. In terms of Exo releases, often one of the questions that we get asked is why should we upgrade? Of course, one of the key reasons for that is around the introduction of new enhancements and increased functionality that comes out with every release. One of the other reasons that we see quite regularly is this need to ensure ongoing and improved compatibility with the current versions of Microsoft software that you're running. You'd be surprised the number of calls that we get on a Monday morning after an over-enthusiastic IT team have rolled out a new version of Office or a new version of Windows Server or something, only to find out that there's a compatibility issue with an older version of Exo that they're running in their environment. So it's really important that you work in conjunction with your IT team, either internally or an external organization that you might partner with, to make sure that those IT infrastructure changes are timed and aligned with the version of MYOB Exo that you're running. The more notice we can get around that plan, the more conversations that you can have with your business partner around compatibility and potential compatibility issues that you need to be aware of, the better for you. Of course, the other reason is we do see lots of fixes come through in later versions of Exo. We have seen the quality control processes at MYOB increase significantly over the years as their tool sets have developed. So certainly we see less bugs over time, but there is a reality that humans are fallible, and we do see them from time to time. So it's good to have the advantage of those fixes when they come through. The other benefit of upgrading, of course, is in the improvement of the effectiveness of ongoing staff training. And it does kind of highlight another issue. You'd be surprised the number of clients where we implement Exo as the shiny new ERP system, and then there's staff changes and there's process changes, and we never really go back to that training requirement. So you get this reduction in knowledge. We hand over from Paul to Fred and from Fred to Jane, and you lose what's best practice in terms of how to use Exo. And often you just lose, the knowledge of the little things that make the job a lot easier. So we really do recommend training as a way of empowering your staff to ensure that they're effectively using the software that you've invested in for your organization. And of course, when we undertake that training, we undertake it on newer versions of Exo. And there's nothing more frustrating for somebody who attends our training than to go back to the office after they've done the training to find that wonderful new feature that they've learned all about isn't available in the current version of Exo that you're using. Of course, we've tended to do a lot of Head Start training over the years. Head Start training in classroom training probably isn't as popular in the last 18 months, particularly the last 12 months with the advent of COVID. But we've moved a lot of that training to online training. So there's actually now online training portals to support those training requirements, which makes it even more efficient for you to keep your staff trained on an ongoing basis. Of course, the other reason for Exo upgrades is to ensure ongoing MYOB support. MYOB have a 2-year support process with new Exo releases. So in essence, it's a rolling 2-year support window. With every release that comes out from the initial release date, it's a 2-year support window from MYOB. So the oldest supported version of MYOB Exo at this point is 2019.1, whose support ends on the 25th of March, not that far away. So it's something to be very aware of. Of course, your business partner will endeavour to support you no matter what version of Exo that you're on, but we really are limited in terms of some of the big structural changes. Often that's actually environmental. For example, at the moment, there's a big change coming in around security and some security protocols that are used. And, MYOB can't retrospectively make that change across old versions of Exo. They need to make that change over new versions of Exo. So security is one of those things that's actually making us consider upgrades potentially sooner than what we potentially did in the past. As soon as we have any online feeds, such as bank feeds, that has a significant impact in terms of the fact that we need to use relatively current versions of Exo. In terms of the Exo version distribution, at the moment, approximately under 20% of users are running a supported version. So there is a broad number that currently aren't supported. We'd encourage you to have that conversation internally in terms of what version of Exo you're running and what your plan is in terms of ensuring that you get onto an upgrade cycle. In terms of new releases, we typically see between 3 and 5 releases a year. And this is just a little bit of a summary of some of the significant features that came in some of the releases. We could certainly provide more details post-session if that would be useful to you. In 2019, we saw 3 releases. And in 2020, we saw 3 releases, and we've already seen 21.1 released to the user base just recently. In terms of what's coming in at 2021.2, it's really continuing this theme addressing the user experience and usability. In 2019.4, there was a significant change of the MYOB development platform, and some significant components changed with the release of the Delphi Tokyo platform that they are now developing with. In 2021.2, as of 2021.1, they've completed the new user interface refresh, which Kate will be excited to demonstrate to you shortly in one of our next sessions. And they're continuing on that by expanding adoption of high DPI support, which is leveraging a new Windows feature that makes it easy for those of us that have very, very high resolutions, but perhaps not so good eyes. And of course, they're introducing other enhancements and features based on the MYOB Ideas portal and the things that are being requested by the users themselves, making sure we're getting leverage across the valued input from the user community. As a general rule, we recommend that you plan to upgrade every 12 to 18 months to stay current on an MYOB supported release. That's kind of a happy medium between not too much change for change's sake. We certainly wouldn't want to recommend that, but we also don't want to be leaving it too long that there's a risk in terms of security or a risk in terms of your internal infrastructure and your Office 365 updates and those sorts of things. So that is something you should be considering in terms of your budgetary upgrade process. In terms of the upgrade methodology, at Kilimanjaro, we recommend a structured, risk-averse approach to upgrades, particularly where you have highly customized or heavily integrated sites with external third-party software or other line of business applications. So we do recommend a structured methodology around a UAT environment, comprehensive testing internally, and there's certainly a low-risk approach to getting you upgraded no matter what version of Exo that you're currently running, and taking advantage of the features that you get as a part of your annual license fee subscription.